Have you ever felt like you couldn't say no to someone? Maybe a person you don't know well asked you on a date, or someone at the bar wants your number, or a classmate made a spectacle of asking you to prom. Known as promposals, these grand, over the top ways of asking someone to prom compete with actual proposals. But the public nature of these gestures makes it extremely difficult to say no, and people are cautioned not to embarrass the person asking by rejecting them. But what kind of message does that send? Why do we prioritize the comfort of the person asking and ignore the comfort of the person being asked? I'm MC Robinson, and this is Unsilenced, a JBWS podcast where we have real conversations about abuse. Today, Mary Jane is joining me to discuss not only why it's so hard for us to say no, but why we need to start teaching our children to accept no. She talks about how rejection is difficult, but that a no from one person does not dictate your value as a human. But before you listen to this episode, please take a moment to subscribe to Unsilenced wherever you get your podcasts, because it really helps us to break the silence around domestic violence. So, you wanted to talk a little bit about promposals and the pressures that people feel to say yes when they're asked to something in such a public way. But first, for anyone that doesn't know, what is a promposal?
So, a promposal is when typically a boy makes a big to-do to ask a girl to the prom.
Mhm.
So it can be anything from they make a very elaborate poster to we've seen ones online where it's like the whole band is involved and they're marching onto the field and it's this big thing. And typically it's in front of either the whole school or a large group of friends or is out in public. So it could be at a local restaurant or gaming event or something like that, where there's a lot of people and a lot of eyes watching what is happening.
Mhm.
And typically they're recorded and people post them on social media. I think that's when we really saw the
Mm,
big boom in these
yeah.
is social media and everything.
Yeah, and they're always so over the top. It's like basically a proposal, but to go to a dance.
Yeah.
And so basically, what is the issue, or what do you see as kind of like maybe the problem with asking someone in such a public, over the top way? Is it the pressure to say yes, or what is really like the kind of difficulty there?
So a lot of it comes down to the pressure that's being put on the person, right? Because it's this big romantic gesture,
Hmm.
right? Everybody's involved. They've gotten all of these different people to come and coordinate, right? Like
Yeah.
especially if you're getting like bands involved. So it's very elaborate. It's very planned out and everything, but it puts so much pressure on the one person to say yes
Hmm.
because it's seen as, oh, this is so romantic. This is so nice. This is so wonderful. Look at everything that this person did for you. And
Hmm.
then what if you say no? Like all of
Hmm.
a sudden the excitement, because there's a lot of excitement too, right? Like
Yeah.
everybody's getting into this. The crowd's getting into it, whoever's watching it. And then imagine you don't want to go with that person. Right?
How
That
does
could be
that
a lot.
feel? Like, how would that feel to somebody that is getting asked and feels like they can't say no? Like, what are the emotions they kind of go through?
Probably some guilt, right? Or did I lead this person on? Did I make them think that I was okay with this?
Mm-hmm.
There could be anger. What if they had talked about it before and they said no, or
Right.
they've been asked out by this person before and said no, right? There could be a lot of pressure then.
Mhm.
Hey, like there could be anger, there could be frustration, um, there there is also the excitement of the moment, right? Like that
Mhm.
social norm of someone asks you something in public, you're going to say yes, like that's kind of the expectation.
Mm.
And then you get wrapped up in that moment, you get sucked up in it, and you're like, oh, this is exciting. Oh, okay, sure, and then as reality sets in, you're like, oh wait, I don't really like this person, or I don't know this person, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, we had talked about it because of some things I had heard were going on. So some of the reason that this came up is, so we're talking promposals, right? Which is 18, 17, 18-year olds who are doing this. It has come up that I have heard about it happening for middle school dances. So
Ooh.
now we're talking 13, 14-year olds,
Mm-hmm.
right? So much younger, a lot of pressure being put on them to say yes. And
Mm-hmm.
think about 13 and 14-year olds. These are kids that they're not really hanging out with each other. They're
Right.
not, like we're still very young at that age, right? And so you have people who haven't even really talked to each other, spent time with each other,
Mm-hmm.
asking each other out to a dance, putting a lot of pressure on the person. Um, and then how do you, if you don't want to go, how do you reject that person where it's not going to hurt them, right? Or to where you feel comfortable even rejecting them?
Mm-hmm.
Because am I going to really feel comfortable saying no in front of all of these people?
Mm-hmm.
All of these people that are watching me and are excited. Um,
Yeah.
it's going to be very difficult to say no in that moment.
And I think this is something that we've kind of touched upon before, but what are the ramifications of feeling like you can't say no to something, in any situation?
Yeah. Well, so if I can't say no to this, right? What about thinking back to my high school days and stuff, like the idea of playing spin the bottle, or
Mm-hmm.
I forget what it was called, but where when you lock two
Seven
people in a
minutes in
closet.
heaven.
Yeah, 7 minutes in heaven, right? And can I say no to that? Right?
Oh.
Or if I'm out at a Christmas party and
Mm-hmm.
there's mistletoe and someone comes to give me a kiss, right? Do I have autonomy over myself to say, no, 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 like I don't want to be kissed. I don't want that,
Yeah.
right? And I do know raising a child that there's more of a pressure, or not a pressure, but more of this movement of don't pressure your kids to
Right.
give hugs,
Mm-hmm.
right? Let them know that they have autonomy over their body and that they can say no, or they get to choose who they give hugs to or kisses to,
Mm-hmm.
right? But at the same time, we're then pressuring them to say yes in other ways, right? And how does that then translate? Right? If it's going to embarrass somebody else, then I have to say yes.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So if I'm playing spin the bottle, which I'm already probably pressured into feeling I have to play that game,
Mm-hmm.
and then it lands on somebody that I don't want to, I'm going to feel that pressure that I need to because I don't
Yeah.
want to embarrass anybody.
Yeah, it's almost like you have to abandon yourself and your own like wants and needs to just kind of perform. And I think this is a really important piece of this. Why is it such a problem to encourage people, oh, I don't want to embarrass them, so I'm just going to do X, Y, and Z. I'm just going to kiss them. Or, he asked me for my number in the bar. He's with all his friends. Like, I don't want to say no. I'm just going to give my number in all of these situations. But what kind of messaging does this send to people that we feel like, you can't say no societally in certain situations and have it be acceptable?
Yeah, it tells us that we have to either come up with excuses, right? Because what do you do in the bar? You just get change your number
Yes.
by one number, right?
Yeah.
The last number of my phone number is no longer 8, it's 9,
Yeah.
right? And then some random person's getting phone calls. But so we come up with like tricks
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
how to not embarrass. But if we start to, part of it is one, teaching our children that they can say no,
Yes.
but also is teaching people that it's okay when someone says no to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's what's missing here, right? We're trying to start teaching children it's okay to say I have autonomy, and it's okay to say I don't want to give you a hug. But then at the same time, we're saying, but don't embarrass anybody.
Yeah.
Don't make them feel bad, right?
Yeah.
When instead, what we should be teaching them is it's okay when someone tells you no, all right? That doesn't take away from your self worth. that doesn't take away from what you have to offer to the world. It
Mm.
just means that that person doesn't want that thing.
That is so brilliant, Mary Jane. Of course, always coming in with these fascinating angles. But I mean, that is a really important piece. Like, why do you think for a person hearing no could be so devastating or something that we want to avoid at all costs? Like, what is that?
Because we're taught that if someone tells us no, that that means we're not worthy,
Ooh,
right? We're taught that if someone doesn't want to kiss me, then I'm not attractive, right? If someone doesn't want to help me, then I'm not worth helping, right?
mm,
If someone doesn't want to spend time with me, that then I'm not fun or I'm not worthy enough.
yeah.
And what we need to learn is that just because that one person doesn't want to do it doesn't mean that there aren't other people out there that do, right? And that I'm still worthy of loving myself, of wanting to spend time with people, of, being with others. But it's just this person, it's not a connection, right?
Yeah. It's so interesting because what you're saying, and it's so good to bring this up because you're right. We still are approaching it from like, you know, basically the person that's experiencing it, the victim, if you will, being able to say no and feeling empowered. And that's so important. But what a fascinating concept of accepting no and working on navigating those feelings. Like, do you have any tips for people who maybe struggle with hearing no or do feel, they would have a promposal, they do all this stuff, they put in all this effort, and the person they're asking says no. Like, how do they kind of begin to even rectify that within themselves and not take it personally?
So the one thing, at least with like things like promposals
Yeah.
or even a proposal,
Yeah.
marriage proposal or a dance proposal, anything like that, talk to the person first.
Yeah.
Don't spring that on somebody,
Right.
right? Make sure that the other person wants that thing. You
Mm.
don't have to say, I'm definitely asking you to the prom, or you don't have to say, like, I'm going to do it at this day, at this time.
Right.
But what does that person want?
Yeah.
Right? I was talking to one boy who was asking a girl to the dance,
Hmm.
and I asked him, are you doing this promposal thing? And he's like, well, we talked about it. She wants to go with me,
Hmm.
but she doesn't like the spotlight. She doesn't like a lot of people
Right.
looking at her.
Hmm.
So I'm just going to do it with our friend group in this way. That's the way to do it, right? Like she
Right.
doesn't know when he's asking her. She
Hmm.
she doesn't know the details of it, but he listened to her. He talked to her. He found out what she liked,
Hmm.
and that's the way that he's going to do it, right?
Right.
Because then it's recognizing that you are a person too,
Hmm.
and that we both need to be comfortable with what is happening, right?
Yeah.
So don't spring it on somebody.
I mean, that's something that I talk about with my friends a lot is like, I don't know if a marriage proposal, particularly, or something that's like big and showy like that, should ever be a surprise. Like, because like what it just doesn't, it almost puts, and I don't know, would you agree with this? It almost puts the power entirely with the person that's asking, and then the
Yeah,
person that's like receiving the ask feels a sense of obligation no matter what to say yes, and
yeah,
to ask them to do that in that moment spontaneously is kind of unfair, would you
yeah.
say?
Yeah, it's definitely unfair. I mean, think about it. Marriage is a huge thing.
Yeah.
That's not something just to be like, oh, yeah,
Yeah.
like why not? And there are people that are very spontaneous, but my bet is if you've been dating somebody for a while,
Yeah.
you know if they're that type of person,
Yes.
right? Are they someone that likes the big grand gestures? I know for myself, like I hate even going to restaurants on my birthday because I don't want them to sing happy birthday
Right.
to me.
Right.
Right? So the idea of being asked in front of a
Yeah.
big group of people would be totally embarrassing,
Hmm.
right? But other people love that stuff,
Yeah.
right? And so, but the odds are if you're dating someone for a while, which hopefully you are before you ask them to marry you,
Hmm.
you know that about the person,
Right.
right? And so you kind of read, understand that, right?
Yeah.
Have conversations about marriage. It doesn't mean that you're saying, oh, yeah, I'm definitely asking you,
Right.
but is this something you want to do?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So having those conversations about, is this something you're interested in? Is this something
Yeah.
we want to do together?
Hmm.
If we were to do it, what's your thoughts on it? What are my thoughts on it? Right. So that way we have some understanding of
Hmm.
where each other stands.
Yeah, it
Right.
reminds me of what you said about like an equal buy-in instead of like it's a one decision, this person's deciding everything. It's allowing, hey, like this is how I feel. Do you also feel this way? So that it's
Yeah.
more equitable, kind of, right?
Yeah. We're on even ground there.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Because you're right. Like if I just spring this huge thing on you, I definitely now have more power because I have all of these other people behind me
Yeah.
rooting for me.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Whereas the person who's being asked is is by themselves,
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
right? They've been singled out, they've had the spotlight put on them, and everybody else is on the side of the person asking.
Yeah.
At least that's the way it comes across. That might not be what it
Yeah.
is, right? There might be somebody in the back who wanted to ask that person too, that's rooting that they don't say
Yeah.
yes. But for the most part, it feels like everybody's looking at you. Everybody wants the yes,
Yeah.
right? And then how do I back out of that? And
Mm-hmm.
so what will happen sometimes is that people will say yes and then later on back out.
Right.
That feeling like I need to say yes. Or they go with somebody that they didn't really want to go with.
Yep.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard of that happening where they just say yes and it's like, oh, it's not a big deal. It's just taking pictures. And then I don't have to, when I get to the dance, I can go hang out with my friends. But is that really how we want people to feel? And then
Right.
again, how does that translate later on? Oh, it's just a kiss. Oh, it's just one night. It's just this thing, right? We
Mm-hmm.
don't want to ever feel that way, that we don't have the power to say, no, I don't
Yeah.
want that.
Feels very isolating too. Like even the way you're describing it, it's like very, okay, this is where we are and this one person is being singled out. And you kind of alluded to this, but how does this feeling like you can't say no feed into unhealthy relationships and maybe even, setting the groundwork now of, oh, I don't want to embarrass them. They asked me. I really should consider their feelings over mine. How does that set somebody up for maybe danger in future relationships?
I don't want to break up with them because I don't want to hurt them.
Yep.
I don't want to end the relationship because it's going to put them in a bad spot.
Mhm.
Right? I'll stay longer just so that to know that they'll be okay later on, right? Or I won't say no when this thing that they're doing hurts me
Mm.
because it makes them feel better.
Yes.
It's what they need in this moment,
Mhm.
right? And so I'll put up with different behaviors. I'll stay through different bad things. I'll see red flags and be like, oh, well, overall they're a good person, but they're just doing this thing that's not so great. And I don't want to hurt them. I can help them, and so I will stay so that way it doesn't hurt, right? Or I
Mhm.
don't want to be the bad guy. Sticking up for myself would be being the bad guy, right? And that's sticking up for yourself is never being the bad guy, right? Saying that this is not what is good for me and this is not what I want in my life. That's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we're taught that we need to put other people before us,
Mhm.
right? And so, yeah, it translates to all of these negative things as we go down the road.
Mhm. Yeah. And obviously, I don't want to gender this because men and all genders can feel this, but why do you think sometimes in these situations where it is often a boy asking a girl to the dance or a boy asking a girl to marry him, why do you think society is more okay with a woman being uncomfortable with those romantic advances versus a boy having his feelings hurt in those moments? So society's kind of like, oh, don't embarrass him. Just say yes. You can say no later. Like, this is the way you do it. Why do you think that is the societal approach that we have rather than being okay with men being uncomfortable?
I think we're taught that women should be submissive
Mm-hmm.
from a very young age, right? Girls are there to be pretty and to make people feel good, right? We're the ones that make people feel good. We're the
Yes.
ones that
Mm-hmm.
we're the comfort. We're the ones you go to when you're sad, right? We build people up. That's
Mm-hmm.
what women and girls are taught that we're supposed to do, right? We're the nurturers.
Mm-hmm.
And so where boys are the strong one and the protector, we're the nurturers and the caregivers. And
Right.
that's part of caregiving. I have
Mm-hmm.
to make everybody else feel better before I focus on myself. Right? And so it's the same thing. I need to make you feel comfortable. If you feel comfortable, then I'll be okay. Right. And it translates also to safety, right? If you're comfortable, if you're happy, then I'm safe
Right.
because you have power over me. You're stronger than I am. And
Mm-hmm.
so I need to make you feel comfortable, you happy, and then that's safety for me.
And sometimes in an abusive relationship, it could quite literally, a victim could that or somebody that's experiencing it could be like, oh, if I could just stop bothering him, if I could just, act right. Like I shouldn't have talked to this guy. I shouldn't have cooked the steak this way. I feel like those themes are kind of played out in abusive relationships too of if I could just make everything okay and make sure their feelings are taken into account, then I won't get hurt today.
And I won't
Do
get
you
hurt.
agree?
Yeah, if I could take care of them, if I can keep the house looking nice, if I could just stop talking to these people that he doesn't want me talking to or they don't want me talking to, if I could just be better, if I could lose the weight, if I could
Mm-hmm.
make myself prettier, if I could do these things, then they would be happy and they would be okay.
Yeah.
And then that translates to me being okay,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And, but that all comes from, or we're learning that from not being able to say no.
Yes.
Right? And so when it's like, oh, it's not a big deal, it's just a dance.
Mm-hmm.
Just one night is not a big thing. We have to remember the message that that is sending.
Mm-hmm.
That my comfort, even if it's just for one night, even if it's just for 5 minutes for those pictures, my being comfortable with what's happening is not as important as keeping the other person happy.
Yes.
Right? And that is a really dangerous message that we teach our children, right?
Yeah.
Because that is coming from parents and from
Mm-hmm.
society as a whole, right? And so we need to be really careful about that message that we're sending to our children.
Yeah, because the ramifications in the future, it's really easy to be like, oh, just, they're 13, like it's okay. But it's planting that seed of, I can't say no in this situation. I have to say yes. And then what that could bloom into in really difficult ways.
Yeah.
Um, what kind of advice would you give, like, to parents then in this situation of how to talk to their kids about saying no and kind of having that navigating that conversation?
So I would definitely talk to all of our kids, boys and girls, right?
Mm-hmm.
That you always have the right to say no. And no is a complete sentence. You don't have to justify it. You don't have to give a reason. You can just say no.
Right.
Right? I don't want this. No.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I think what's more important in this is starting to teach our children how to take no, right? And how to prepare ourselves for that. So if you have a child who's preparing to do one of these big proposals,
Mm-hmm.
having that conversation about what if that person says no? Have you talked to them? Are they aware that this is happening? Do they want this too?
Wow.
And if they can't say yes or no, if the other person wants this too,
Mm-hmm.
then no, we need to, as parents, we need
Shut
to
it
step
down.
in and say, this isn't a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
Right. But even younger than that, you can start to talk to kids like if, you know, Betty and Susie are playing on the playground
Yeah.
and Betty doesn't want to play anymore. Talk to Susie about it's okay that Betty doesn't want to play anymore. That doesn't mean that you're not worth playing with,
Wow.
right? But Betty is allowed to go off and do her own thing.
Mm-hmm.
You can go talk to somebody else, right? Or you can play with me or like you can play by yourself. You're fun to hang out with on your own, right?
Yeah.
And that's okay, right? It's okay for someone to tell you no,
Mm-hmm.
right? and start that very young. Just because somebody says no doesn't mean you're not worthy.
I love that. That message is so important because I feel when you hear no, it's almost like this is a reflection on me. And it I feel a lot of times people also one no, right? To your point, isn't everyone in the universe saying no to you, but sometimes it feels that way. And kind of how do you really like sit with that and process that because you know sometimes there's violence that happens because you were rejected or kind of seen as slighted by someone and that is such an interesting thing because we don't really teach people how to accept no even in the moment, even like if you're talking about sex, let's say, it's like, well, what, you don't want to be with me, like why don't you want this, blah 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 blah, and it's very tied up in, I don't know if it's
And our
ego.
self-worth.
Yeah.
It's very tied to our self-worth. If somebody tells me no, that means I'm not worthy,
Wow.
right? And it's not. That person is allowed to say no, right? Like, and think about yourself when you say no. And sometimes that's the way you can like talk to kids about it too,
Yeah.
is like when you say no, what's going on,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, what are you kind of thinking? Well, I'm not in the mood to play that game, or I just want to be, I want some time by myself, or
Yeah.
I want to do these things. Okay. So when this person says no, what could be going on with them,
Mm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, they just don't want to play that game, or maybe they like to have alone time, or like all of these other things that could be going on. And do they have to justify that to you? No,
Mm.
they don't have to share that reason.
Right.
Just like you don't have to share yours. No is a complete sentence. You are allowed to just say no, right?
Wow.
Same thing with this other person. And if we start teaching that at a very young age,
Mm-hmm.
then over time, that child is going to grow up knowing, okay, it's okay if people tell me no. If I don't get the job, that means doesn't mean that I'm not good. It just means that maybe that job wasn't for me,
Yeah.
right? If I don't date this person, if I ask this person out and they say no, all right, that doesn't mean that I'm not attractive or that I'm
Mm-hmm.
not good enough. It just means I wasn't the right cup of tea for that person,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so let me go out and meet some other people, right? And I'm not saying that rejection is easy. It's never easy,
Yeah.
right? But if we can start to process it a little bit differently, then we're going to be okay with the no.
Mm.
And think about the gift that you give your child if you teach them that from a
Yeah.
young age,
Mm-hmm.
right? That it's okay. Talk about resiliency. Right? We're
Yeah.
gonna get up and be like, all right, this person doesn't want it. That's okay. I'm still awesome.
Yeah.
You know?
Self-confidence through the roof.
Yeah. And that's what we want, right? We want kids
Yeah.
that are confident and know that they're capable, right?
Yeah.
And so we're actually giving them a really good gift when we teach them it's okay to be told no.
Yeah.
Okay for someone to say no,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, but that comes from teaching them that. And then also, like I said, like, have you had a conversation with this
Yeah.
person? Do they know? Right? When we're talking about bigger things,
Right.
right? Like the promposals or a marriage proposal, or even asking someone out on a date. Have you
Mm-hmm.
talked to them? Have you gotten to know them? Maybe let's be friends first, you know, see it, especially in the teenage years, right? In the early 20s. Let's be friends first.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, I think you're a cool person. Let's hang out. Right? We don't need to immediately go to we're boyfriend, girlfriend, we're girlfriend, girlfriend, we're
Yeah.
boyfriend, boyfriend, right? Like, let's be friends.
Yeah.
Let's get to know each other,
Yeah.
right? And see where that then leads.
I love that you also say that no is a complete sentence because a lot of times you also hear like, well, why not? Like, why don't you want to go to the dance? Why don't you want to marry me? Blah, 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 blah. And I think that that is so powerful that you don't really owe anyone an explanation for things. I mean, obviously, I think sometimes like it's good to describe stuff if you're like in a committed relationship and you say no or whatever. But like, I think there's such power in knowing that a no is okay or accepting that like you have your own wants and needs and it's okay to have those because I think that's not something that we teach people. And just going back to like the promposal or something like that, What are ways that people could say no? Do you have any tips, like in public when things are going on? Like, what is like kind of the a response you could take?
You could say, let's get to know each other first,
Yeah.
right? So, especially if it's somebody that you don't really know,
Right.
right? You could be like, hey, let's go off and talk, right? Like
Yes.
let's get to know each other,
Yeah.
right? Or it's hard, right? I'm like,
Yeah.
even I am
Yeah.
kind of stumped on things that you could say, but you could just say no,
Yeah.
right? And it would be a hit, and it might not make you popular,
Mm.
but in the end, what's more important, right? Your feeling of safety and your feeling of security, or making this other person happy,
Yeah.
right? And quite frankly, they just made you really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So it's okay to say no and make them uncomfortable too.
But isn't that the interesting part though? Is that like it's okay to make this person really, really uncomfortable, but then like women or whoever are like, oh, but I can't say no and make them uncomfortable in return.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm just going to be okay with being uncomfortable. And that messaging goes back to what you said about like women being like emotional caretakers and
Yeah.
how there's so much pressure to like manage other people's emotion placed on women, which is unfair and it happens from a young age.
Yeah. Yeah. So, you know what? If they're making you feel uncomfortable, you have no obligation to make them feel comfortable in that moment,
Yeah,
right? If
absolutely.
they put you on spotlight and they've made you feel uncomfortable, you can say no.
You know, it's interesting because one thing that keeps kind of coming up, and I'm not sure, like it's like a thread, but also people that use abuse oftentimes will accelerate the relationship and it's really intense and it's really fast. And sometimes there's an I love you or talks about marriage really early on. So I'm also wondering if they could kind of use that pressure and obligation to also be like, I love you, marry me. Look at this huge public display that also
Mhm.
makes people feel like, oh, this is a little fast, but maybe I will. Like, do you think that also is kind of tied in with this?
Yeah, it definitely falls into the idea of like love bombing,
Yeah,
right? Where I'm
yes.
going to do these grand gestures. I'm going to do all this stuff because it falls down into power.
Yes.
It goes to power and control, right? We kind of mentioned it already, where I have all of these people on my side. I
Yeah.
have all of society saying, you need to say yes to me,
Yeah.
right? That is a huge power move,
Mhm.
right? And so the other person is feeling very obligated to say yes,
Yeah.
right? And it definitely falls into that category of power and control. And think about
Mhm.
the thinking behind it, right? If I'm asking you in this promposal thing, there's part of my brain that's telling me I have the right to do this. I
Yeah.
have the right to put you on the spot, to put you in an uncomfortable position when
Mm.
I don't even know you,
Wow.
right? So what underlying thing is kind of going on there that I have the right to do these things?
It's an inherent power almost
It's
or
an inherent
perception.
power. I have this power. I have this right to want to go to the dance with you and to want to put you on the spot to have to say yes to it,
Wow.
right? Because that's what we're doing. We're putting them on the spot. We're in a position where they feel like they have to say yes.
Mm. Mhm.
Right? And so I'm going to get the yes that I want, and it doesn't matter how I've made you feel in that moment.
Yeah, and I'm sure these aren't like conscious thoughts necessarily, but it is what goes along with it, like I said, inherently of, this is very public, the whole school's involved, I got this involved. It's like, you're right. I have the right to do this. I have the right to kind of put you in this position and I expect you to say yes. And when you really kind of like see it that way and break it down, people are always like, "Oh, come on, like you're a killjoy, like let the kids have fun." But there are ways that you could still have a promposal and have it be where there isn't that power and control aspect of it, and that's kind of what we're advocating for.
Yeah. Yeah. Like I'm not saying don't do it. What I'm saying is have that conversation ahead of time.
Yeah.
Know that the other person is on board, that they want to do it, right? And know that they want to go to the dance with you or that they want
Yeah.
to marry you, right?
Mhm.
Then it's fine. And they are fun, right? romantic gestures like that can be fun,
Yeah.
but not when we're putting pressure on someone to say yes. They're very romanticized,
Yes.
too, right? Like think about movies. I've got like a few running in my head right now of different movies where there's this huge grand gesture, and all of a sudden that's what sways the person.
Yeah.
That's what changes their mind,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's not reality,
Yeah.
right? Like that's a movie.
Mm-hmm.
Those
Mm-hmm.
grand gestures aren't what's going to sway the person to your side,
Mm-hmm.
right? So we want to be very careful of how we're asking people, do they want this, right? Um, are they comfortable with it?
Right.
What's their comfort level with what's happening? Right? Because otherwise, it does go to that inherent, I have the right to do this, whether it makes you comfortable or not.
Thank you, Mary Jane, for bringing such a unique perspective to this conversation. Teaching people to accept no instead of just talking about the importance of saying no is such a powerful point. Please tune in next time to learn more about all facets of abuse, because education is the first step in ending domestic violence. Thank you for listening to this episode of Unsilenced, Real Conversations About Abuse. This podcast is produced by JBWS, a domestic violence agency serving Morris County, New Jersey. Please let us know what topics you would like covered on this podcast by sending an email to podcast@jbws.org. Please note that this email address is only intended for content relating to the podcast. It is not meant to offer immediate assistance or access to services. If you live or work in Morris County and think you might be in an unhealthy relationship, JBWS is here to help. Please visit our website at jbws.org to learn more about our services, or call our 24-hour helpline to speak to members of our staff at 1-877-782-2873. If you recognize controlling or abusive behaviors in yourself, JBWS can also help change those behaviors. Through our Jersey Center for Nonviolence, JBWS offers programs for men, women, and adolescent males who have used abusive or controlling behaviors in their relationships. Please visit jbws.org/JCNV or call 973-539-7801 to learn more. If you don't live in Morris County, please call the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-7233. Domestic violence grows in silence, so thank you so much for listening and helping us break through that silence through these types of conversations. Please follow us on social media and continue to share our content to get as many people talking about domestic abuse as possible.